Now, now look into the second paper for the day. A very short paper, not with many points to summarize. This paper is more like a preparatory paper for a more detailed paper, which we'll see after this, 3 essays on sexuality. Sexuality in the etiology of neurosis. It's almost like a proto paper to 3 essays in sexuality. It's kind of a follow-up closing paper to the papers of studies in hysteria. In this paper, Freud is trying to make a point that in neurosis of most types, if not all types, and by neurosis he covers hysteria, he covers neurasthenia, he covers obsessions, he covers phobia. He also covers difficult sexual problems. He also covers some aggressive problems. All of them put together under the word neurosis. Freud in this paper shares that sexuality is centrally located in the causation of neurosis. So Freud is slowly moving from psychological problem being rooted in the unconscious mind in a traumatic event, and the traumatic event located mostly in the childhood period of life, and the traumatic event having an idea and affect involved in the traumatic scene or at the traumatic moment. And now Freud takes another step and says that the specificity of the idea and the affect involved in the traumatic moment are such that they are by and large of a sexual nature. So Freud is bringing in the element of childhood sexuality in the unconscious mind as being central to the causation of all psychological problems, or at least most psychological problems. And this is what he tries to establish in this paper, Sexuality in the Etiology of Neurosis. Important concepts before we get to the center of the paper. First is the concept of the return of the repressed. Freud says in many papers before this paper that whatever is repressed has the characteristic to return back in the form of symptoms, in the form of slips of tongue, in the form of repeated actions we do, in the form of our preferences, and in many forms we don't even recognize. However, there is no way to keep the repressed completely repressed for a long time. In some way or the other, the return of the repressed happens. Does that mean nothing can be successfully repressed? No, that is not the point. Of course, things can be successfully repressed, and many things are. However, in case of symptoms that we see, there inevitably is the return of the repressed. So this is a very important concept for Freud. The return of the repressed is at the core of all hysteria, and then he goes to say core of all neurosis. And then in his later paper, Psychopathology of Everyday Life, he also talks about the non-traumatic return of the repressed, which we find in slips of tongue, slips of writing, slips of hearing. So return of the repressed is a very important concept. That of all that is repressed, some of it has this irrepressible characteristic of trying to return back to consciousness in some way or the other. And mostly it is a disguised return of the repressed. Second important element Freud says is of screen memories. And there is a complete paper by this title. Title of the paper is Screen Memories, in which Freud talks about childhood memories being of two types: ordinary childhood memories and screen memories. Screen memories are those memories which are vaguely recollected, where either we have only a visual memory or some audio memory, but not the memory of the full event. Second, we see no peculiar reason, no convincing reason why that memory should be recollected so vividly. Usually, we recollect something that we are interested in, something that we want to work with, something that is a necessity. If these elements are not there, if something is not interesting, not necessary, not worked with every day, then it is forgotten. However, screen memories, they escape seemingly this law, that they seem not very interesting, nothing very important about them. We don't need them, and we are not working with them on an everyday basis. And yet, they remain so vivid to our memory. And Freud says this is because the screen memories are memories where it is a contest between two forces. One force which wants to make that event conscious, and the force of repression which wants to keep it unconscious. Because something difficult, either in terms of idea or in terms of affect, is involved in that event, and therefore the screen memories is a snapshot of some traumatic event. And whenever therefore we have a screen memory, we must investigate deeply to uncover the full truth, and that will clearly lay bare that the screen memory in fact is a snap of a very strongly loaded memory, mostly traumatic, but even otherwise a very strongly loaded memory. Freud then goes on in this paper to say that many of the screen memories may have a sexual connection to them, and therefore these memories have become screen memories, and a large part associated with them is repressed because of the sexual content. So return of the repressed and screen memories and associated sexuality to screen memories is very important element as a background to go into the center of the paper. Center of the paper is this. Freud says sexuality is very important in causation of neurosis, and the unconscious traumatic event of childhood, which we believe is the causation of neurosis of all types, that unconscious childhood, that childhood unconscious traumatic event is loaded with sexual content at its core. Now, the sexual content, Freud says, can be of two types. There may be sexual actions that one has performed as a child or one wanted to perform as a child. Wanted to perform meaning not something in fantasy, but just about to do something. So something done or something just about to do on the line of action. Either some sexual action of that type, done or about to be done. And second, a sexual fantasy. Either of them can be at the core of causation of neurosis. And these fantasies and actions are repressed. Even in childhood, the mind is capable of understanding the do's and don'ts, of generating and working with elements of guilt and shame so early in life. And therefore, the culture of Freud's times being very repressive, Freud used to say that the desires, fantasies, and actions are severely repressed by culture, leading to frustration and therefore pathology. And because this is at the center, that there is a sexual desire, very strong sexual desire, repressed by culture, and agent of culture in the mind being superego, and that leading to frustration, anger, pain, guilt, and shame. This becomes the core, this phenomena becomes the core of any pathology, and therefore Freud's approach or Freud's school is put under arcade of drive frustration model. That Freud's approach and understanding of pathology essentially is a drive frustration model. That there is a strong sexual drive repressed by culture inside the mind by superego and its defenses, and therefore the frustration, therefore the symptom and related effects. Now, Freud says the repression can happen in two ways. One, there can be a spontaneous repression, meaning there is a desire either to fantasize, either there is just a fantasy or an action is done or about to be done. And right at that moment, there is a repression of what has been done or what was to be done or what was fantasized. Right at that time. The second kind of repression is that when the fantasy or action is done, at that time, the child does not believe it to be wrong, it to be provoking guilt and shame. The child is free, sort of, from the superego in a way. But later on, as the child grows up and child learns, these are the things not to be done. There is a retrospective repression of memory. So what was not repressed when it occurred is retrospectively repressed and loaded with guilt and shame when one starts learning that these actions ought to be loaded with guilt and shame and ought not to be done. So there is a spontaneous repression at the moment, and there is a retrospective repression post-cultural training. Both of them can happen. Freud also talks about very intense guilt and shame in childhood. Although in one sense, Freud's superego gets built at the end of the Oedipus complex, unlike Klein, where she believes the superego to be inborn. And Freud's Oedipus complex occurs between 4 to 5 years of age. Some people put it 4 to 7 years of age. Whereas for Klein, the Oedipus complex is preponed to 2.5 years of age. So Freud talks about intense feelings of inhibition, guilt, and shame related to sexuality, which is seen even in childhood. Freud then opens up this whole area of childhood sexuality to say that children are not innocent of sexuality as we would like to believe, but there is intense sexual activity in childhood, both in the mind and at times in the body. Not the bodily activity is not exactly like that of an adult, but there is bodily manifestation of sexuality. And slowly from there, after talking about sexuality being a strong drive, repression being a strong phenomena, guilt and shame being strong elements, childhood sexuality being there, Freud is preparing the ground for later Oedipus complex as a core of human psychopathology. So he has not yet come to Oedipus complex. He is yet to go into 3 essays on sexuality and later on into Oedipus, but slowly he is moving into that direction from unconscious traumatic event, from first discovery of the unconscious mind to unconscious traumatic event as being the cause of neurosis, to sexuality being at the core of the unconscious traumatic event, to this unconscious traumatic event mostly being located in the childhood, to the Oedipus complex. So slowly the movement is getting more specific, directional, concentrated, converging into the Oedipus complex. This is a short paper and not many points really. It's more like a preparatory paper to go further into 3 essays on sexuality, which we'll do right away. Any questions? Send it to me on hvindia@gmail.com. Thank you.